I think that's right.
Hi, this is Justin Spring. I wanted to say a few things about things that haven't been absorbed into the mainstream thinking. So that whole range of, what can you call them? Alternative worldviews, I think, is a pretty good one. There are things that are outside of the mainstream current thinking, you know? And there's a reason for that, is that they threaten the mainstream thinking, you know? I've always been interested in those kind of things. Whenever I get a chance, when I have some time off, or if I'm on a sabbatical or something, I'm an artist, so I will sometimes have some stretches of time when I'm in another country or when I'm away in a cabin somewhere. I'll have time to tune in to all of the web radio stations and the video stations that are talking about this kind of thing, and you kind of get an upgrade as to what's happening. I had a chance to do that recently, about a month ago, and the thing that surprised me was that in all of those areas is how little people knew about the nature of those cultures that existed prior to the act of writing. Because what's happening is that various snippets of those old oral poems have found their way through transcription into written documents. There was a miracle that any of them were brought over. The Bible is an example. The Sumerian oral poems were another example. Homer is another example. And I'm sure that some of the Egyptian writings that we have also had their start as oral poems. That's the only way it could exist. That's something, if you don't know anything about that, that you should probably do some reading, and there are 2 books I have out you can take a look at. So that I know a lot about the source of much of the information that has kind of dribbled its way through onto the shores of literacy, often transcribed incorrectly, often translated incorrectly into our current languages, and we can't take things that are said in poetry as fact. It's not sitting back there somewhere in 40,000 BC or 3,000 BC or 7,000 BC, some kind of document like in a popular science magazine where everything is laid out in little compartments as to who the gods were and what they did, and it's all clean and smooth. Because in oral cultures, a word often has many, many meanings depending on how you gesture and how you say it. And the intonation, which doesn't come over basically when you translate it into writing. So that's true about Homer. That's also true about the Bible, although Homer, the Greeks were pretty fastidious at it, and I think the Hebrews were too, but still you're dealing with languages that were 10,000 years old when these poems were made, or 15 or 20,000 years old when these poems originally began to gather and to become what we call today myths, which is, we would describe the Bible as that, or the Sumerian poems, you know. The fact of the matter is they became myths over a period of thousands of years as they became poems which, when told over and over again in a spontaneous way, reflected the heart of that culture. So they're really not about facts so much, but about love, death, honor, defeat, birth, death, creation. They're about things that we don't really bother too much about in our conventional mainstream thinking, but we are concerned about in some of the alternative thinking. Unfortunately, we sometimes take the terminology which has been thrown onto the shores of literacy, as I say, like flotsam, and we've taken that as fact, and I'm going to go into some of that as I go on. The second thing that I found is that there doesn't seem to be really any cognizance of the power of the unconscious. And I'm talking about the unconscious as an equation of the psychic world or the other world, or whatever you want to call it, that pre-literate peoples, again, this is where these things start, that were a world or a state of consciousness that they were very concerned with. They spoke back and forth to the gods constantly, and they did it from a much different consciousness than we have. If you think that people 5,000 years ago or 6,000 years ago had a consciousness like ours, with our logic and our mind space where we can project future things, we can see ourselves in our mind doing things, and we can go back into memory and pull them out and feel guilty about it or ecstatic, whatever it happens to be, where we can plot alternative actions that we may take in the future. That consciousness was not present in pre-literate peoples. That may come as a surprise to you, but unless you understand that in fact you won't be able to understand the products of that consciousness, which was, and in fact the product was always poetry, which spoke in metaphor, and metaphor is not fact. Metaphor is a phrase that can mean many, many, many things, and it's very important to understand that when you take a look at the transcriptions of those great oral poems, those great metaphors that have come up into the world of literacy. And I take the Bible, Homer, and the Sumerian documents, and any of the Mayan documents or the Egyptian documents that we have, those ancient roots, which only existed on the wind and which were brought into the world of writing by an act of luck or timing or the importance to the people and were somehow kept, they've been altered over thousands of years, and who knows if the original translation or transliteration or transcription is correct, because a poet couldn't stop it. It's not a page in a book. He would be speaking the poem and somebody would have to be taking it down, and it wasn't with a typewriter or a PC or audio recorder. You had to do it on clay tablets. So you're talking about a very messy operation where lots of errors could really pop up. You have to remember that, as well as the nature of the information is always a metaphor. That you always have to remember also that the transcription, the translation of it, right on the spot initially, whenever that occurred, when we're able to bring that over, which we look at today as, oh, this is the Bible, this is fact, this is it. It's not fact at all. It's very apt to error, and it's very apt to misinterpretation, because, like I say, one word could mean many, many, many things. It depends on how you spoke it and your gestures and things like that. So what also happens is, in today's conscious world, with our consciousness, we have very little knowledge of the unconscious mind. You know, Jung, before he died, spent a good 70 years trying to probe the world of the unconscious, which is the world that really moves us. You know, we think we make all our decisions, but the fact is they're made by some part of us which we have no control over. It's the part of us that dreams, part of us that falls in love and hates, okay? The part of us that has intimations of death and birth, that knows things that it shouldn't know, in terms of our modern consciousness, you know. It's a consciousness of feelings. And it is completely uncontrollable by our conscious mind. It makes its appearance when it wants to, sometimes in the form of a poem. That's the one hangover we have from that ancient time. Always in our dreams. Always in our dreams it comes up to try to inform us of something. And it also comes up sometimes in visions. Voices. You can't bid them up. There's a lot of guys around and they're doing pentagrams and dancing around. The unconscious world, the world of the psychic world, the other world, comes when it wants to. You can coax it and it may come or it may not. You know, it's called tempting the muse, and or it's tempting the unconscious, or whatever you want to call it, or the other world. It may work or it may not. There's really no way to tell. If it's moving your way and you're doing the right thing, it may appear. But you can never bet your last dollar on it. I wouldn't anyway, you know. So what I found out is that there's never any discussion of the fact of the tremendous noise outside, whatever the hell that is. We have it. There is just never a discussion of the fact that many of these appearances, I'm talking especially about UFOs, lights in the sky, abductions and things like that, maybe, there's no saying, either real things that, in fact, we don't know about, that are military secrets, okay? Or, in fact, they may be visitations from some other planetary intelligence. But they also may be, which is never discussed, is they are a emergence of our unconscious minds to speak to us. And it can be done in groups too. It's been done in the past. Some of the more famous ones, which are, of course, Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico and Our Lady of Fatima, which I think that's true about the abductions for sure, and I think it's also true about many of the sightings of craft, large and small. The way the unconscious speaks to us is through metaphor, and if it wants to get through to us, and I think what's happening today, and I'll be very short about it, is that we're going through a change in consciousness. And what's happening in individuals, who might be ordinary individuals just driving a bus, or there could be myself, an artist who is interested in that psychic world and the art that comes out of it, things are going to appear to us in terms of visions and voices, sometimes public, sometimes private, whatever it happens to be. And psychic events aren't hallucinations. But that's one of the problems. When I listen to some people talking, I don't think they have any idea as to how powerful psychic events can be. There's a reality to them which is as real as this table that I'm sitting at here. We know that it's a visitation, something tells us, but in terms of its reality, it's not distorted, and that there's a moment of truth that comes in those visions and those voices that we bend to, and we know that we're being visited by a higher intelligence. That's how it feels anyway. It's felt that way since the beginning of time. So we have to start to take a look at what's happening to us psychically. And I think if I listen to everybody who's been talking about these visitations that are taking place, I would wonder how many people have ever read Jung. It's just impossible, I think, for anybody who has a modern mind to not have read Jung and to understand how powerful the psychic world can be and how its visitations have an intelligence all their own. And that the psychic world is partly us and is partly beyond us. That's all we can say. We kind of know things through it that we couldn't know according to the modern scientific worldview, right? So those two things, which have their roots, their deep roots in pre-literate cultures, that is the unconscious or the psychic world or the other world or the world of the gods, that there was a reality. It wasn't a comic book thing that we think it is today. Somebody's lost their lunch or something. And the nature of the information that was brought to the conscious world by poets, because poets were the people who knew in those days. Science didn't exist. So I'm going to go into some very short little talks about certain things in those areas. I'm going to go into a little bit about what I think in terms of the visitations, the archaeological finds for sure, and the denial by our archaeological establishment, which is part of that great current stream of thinking, which is very rigid and doesn't bend. I mean, that's not to say that's not to talk against it. That's its nature since the beginning of time. The consensus of a culture doesn't yield easily, and the components of it, be the world of poetry, the world of mathematics, the world of physics, the world of social sciences, the world of politics, doesn't give either. And it only gives when there's tremendous pressure from the outside, and those views are slowly made known and slowly accepted by the mainstream, to show you how powerful the consensual thinking is of a culture, that we still believe as a culture that Columbus discovered America in 1492. I mean, everybody who has a brain knows that in terms of the Norsemen were here way before that, and anybody with even a little bit more brain knows that God knows how many civilizations, real Earth civilizations, the Chinese and the Phoenicians, and came to visit us. here in America. They landed maybe down in around the Caribbean basin. That's a natural way to take. The Norsemen took that icy way, but that was their nature. They didn't care, you know. So it's important to really understand is that despite all that information and all that knowledge that's kind of creeping into the knowledge base in all of our books, what's taught in schools, what's accepted, nobody wants to hear anything else. It's Columbus 1492, goodbye, Nina Pinta, Santa Maria, that's all we want to hear. It's not so. It's just simply not so. We don't have the names of the other boats from the Chinese or from the Phoenicians or from the Egyptians, who all had boats that were capable of crossing oceans. We know crossing oceans is not a big deal. Only archaeologists think it's a big deal because they never leave their desk. But if you're a sailor like I am, you can cross the ocean in a 32-foot boat or a 36-foot sailboat very easily, you know. And all those civilizations had craft much larger than that, at least 100 feet they could sail, not accepted. What I think, in order for it to be accepted, time has to go by. More and more people have to contribute to that thinking. And I think that also that we have to be a little more particular when we state our theories as to what's happening or what happened or what's true. You know, anything's possible, but in terms of what we really want to know is what is probable. That's the way your modern cultures work, and that's the way you have to work when you come from the outside, you know. Anything's possible. But what is probable, and the other thing that really works within that is that the simplest explanation is the best. That's a kind of rule of science. It's a good one of just of thinking. It's not always true, but that's just a kind of axiom. If there are many ways to explain something, the simplest, most direct way that explains it is probably the best. And you have to come up with probable solutions, probable that make some sense. And then you begin to make inroads into that culture.